Thank you for joining us. We're going to be talking about multimodal transport, and I've got the most fantastic panel with me. First of all, let me introduce you to Professor Sarah Sharples. Thanks for coming. You're Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Transport and also Professor of Human Factors at the Faculty of Engineering on the University of Nottingham. And you've also been Pro-Vice Chancellor for Equality, Diversity and Inclusion and People. You love sticking complexity systems together. Perhaps that's why you became President of the Chartered Institute of Ergonomics and Human Factors. Thanks for coming. Also, really pleased to have you with us, Emma. Emma Gilthorpe is Chief Operating Officer at Heathrow Airport, where you've worked since 2009. You led the whole revisioning of the airport in something called Heathrow 2.0, which we'll talk about. And in 2021, you were invited by the Secretaries of State for Transport, Business, Energy and Skills to become the CEO of UK Jet Zero Council, which we'll come to in a bit. What an amazing body that is, attempting to create a flight across the Atlantic with no harm to the environment within a generation, and to get the whole UK's aviation sector to be net zero in time with the 2050 commitments of the UK. Fantastic to have you with us. We will come back to that soon. Willem, fantastic too for you. Thank you for coming. Willem-Frederik Metzelaar, Director of Urban Mobility at EIT. You were the Chief Commercial Officer of one of Holland's biggest utility companies, and then you watched Together We Cycle. I understand that was a profound moment for you. You sold your car, you became the chair of Rotterdam's Cyclists Union quite quickly thereafter, and are now involved with active travel and cycling infrastructure across all of Europe, and we look forward to hearing about all that. You're going to talk to us about that. Great. What a panel, huh? It's going to be good. So, the topic is multimodal transport, and how far have we got in that journey? Why does multimodal transport matter to us all? I think there are two big reasons why. One, as a journeying consumer, it's obviously hyper convenient. I want to have a multimodal transport system, so there's a commercial driver in that. But as a planner of transport systems, a multimodal transport system allows me to think about systems issues around decarbonisation as well. So both from the consumer, the convenience factor, and from the transport planner's point of view, these are good things. Sarah, how are we doing with our multimodal transport vision?
So I think first of all, it's really lovely to be here and have the opportunity to talk about some of these really important issues that are vexing us from a transport systems point of view. As Chief Scientific Advisor, my job is to make sure that the Department for Transport has the right sort of evidence and insight that's informing its work on policy and delivery. And when I think about multimodal journeys, I actually go back to some work that was done by the predecessor to the Connected Places Catapult, the Transport Systems Catapult, the Traveller Needs work that was done in the late sort of 2010s. That was a really nice, comprehensive piece of work that looked at multimodal journeys. And one of the things it drew out really strongly was the challenge around pinch points. Pinch points are those points in multimodal journeys where we are not necessarily as confident that that connectivity between the different modes that we need for an end-to-end journey are going to work out. It could be availability of somewhere secure to store your bicycle at the railway station. It could be being confident that the bus is going to be there when you arrive back at the airport, and that you'll be able to take a bus home rather than having to order a taxi. We know that those pinch points play out differently for different parts of the population as well. One of the bits of work that has been funded actually through one of our Department for Transport Research Innovation grants over the years is work looking at virtual reality and augmented reality to help people plan journeys. One of the things that we can do is if we can overcome our lack of confidence about or concerns about a pinch point, that can help us have more confidence in embarking on a multimodal journey. But as well as from the customer point of view, we can think about things from the operator's point of view. And I know there's lots of people in the audience who are very interested in the notion of digital twins and digital shadows. where we can have representations of connectivity in different elements of the journey. So then as operators, and I think the West Midlands Control Centre is a brilliant example of this, we can actually see the potential impact of, for example, disruption on the tram and what that might mean for passenger take-up of the bus network. And so enable operators to then enable and support people who are taking multimodal journeys. So I think that there's lots that technology can do to overcome some of those barriers that we see as we ask people to take multimodal journeys.
Brilliant, thank you. We'll come back to you on Slido. Those of you online and in the audience, please do use Slido to put your questions to Sarah, and we'll come back to those in a minute. Emma, how do you think we're doing on our multimodal transport journey? And before you jump in, I was thinking about Heathrow. What a multimodal, amazing place this is. Elizabeth Line, love it. I've got the underground, got the Heathrow Express, got the motorway. You are a hyper-connected place.
Yep.
But one thing you don't yet have is vertical takeoff taxis. When can we get one of those, please?
Well, hopefully, we'll start to see them emerging at the end of this decade. There are a whole bunch of concepts out there, some of them looking at trial flights in the not too distant future. Not necessarily with people in them yet, though. So I think we are heading inexorably in that direction. I think whenever any new capability like this comes in, you have a lot to sort out. So, you know, whether it's what the interfaces are between the different types of transport in order that you can get a viable commercial model. People talk a lot about the Heathrow to the city route, which is extremely expensive by helicopter, but could be more affordable from an eVTOL point of view. It's highly congested. We don't want any more cars on the road. We've sort of just really grappling with the air quality impacts of that congestion now, but we're having to use price in order to settle that. We haven't managed to introduce enough alternative capability to tempt people in their masses away from using the roads. So obviously, airspace is a huge thing. It's complicated and only just starting on its modernisation journey. So there's a lot to sort out there. But I think the consumer demand will come. I think the technology is nearly there. I think the appetite of governments, regulators is there as well. And I think the people that are bringing stuff forward are motoring.
Does this need a transformation in our air traffic management to get to a digital air traffic management?
Yes, well, interestingly, there's a lot of digital and air traffic management already. I mean, if you go into the NATS tower at Heathrow, it's fully digitised, other than the sort of pilot to controller communication. You rely on a human for that piece, but they're both, you know, a modern flight deck in a Dreamliner is fully digitized. In fact, technically possible to fly without a pilot in the most modern iterations of those flight decks. Now, you'd never want to do that, right? Because you need the pilot there to deal with things when they don't quite work. But the concept of digitizing this capability is absolutely there. What we haven't got, though, are digital motorways in the sky. So planes can technically fly closer together than they ever could before, because the flight decks talk to each other and stop you know, overlaps, which make it unsafe. But what we haven't done is change the way we regulate airspace in order to unlock some of that technology. So huge opportunity. Government is absolutely on the page of wanting to resolve that. We've got some money coming forward to set up a new integrated team that can take that forward. But, you know, if you're going to have eVTOLs flying, we need to sort out that sort of 0 to, what is it going to be? You know, 1,000 feet bit. You know, at Heathrow, I worry about up to 7,000 feet and above 7,000 feet. This is a channel that should be unlockable relatively simply, but then we need to make sure we understand what the rules of the sky are and who gets what and how people interact as they fly around. I'm
delighted to hear you say you think this could be this decade. I'm excited for that. And I also heard 10,000 drones up in the sky at any one time. Yep. It's a congested sky that needs, yeah, brilliant. We'll come back to this and questions please on that. Willem, from big planes in the sky, let's talk about micromobility and active travel in cities. What's going on there?
Well, we see a shift, and it's really happy to see that lots of cities understand that the density of the cities is enormous, is growing, and that car-centric designs are no longer the most functional transportation system. Sorry. What we see is that cities are going to active mobility and smaller vehicles, and lots of so in logistics, for instance, you see from 4 wheels to 2 wheels. That's great. Smaller vehicles and trying to get people out of the car into the streets, walking, cycling, and public transport. And we see it all over Europe, actually.
Where I live, it seems to create quite a lot of contention. And there's quite a lot of argument about this.
Yes.
I cycle my bike, but I'm aware there are lots of people who like to pinch things on local neighbourhood about how angry they are about closing streets down. Is that common to Britain, or is that common everywhere?
No, that's something we see everywhere. So, as you said, I watched a documentary called basically about why the Dutch cycle. Together we cycle, and then I realized that I'm nearly 60 years old, and I was basically a petrol head, lots of cars, and then I understood, okay, I need to change. So it's like quitting smoking, quitting drinking, it's a habit. And so I did that. I went cold turkey, and now I'm an active mobility user. So then I understand so then I entered the Cyclist Federation in Rotterdam, and then I started to realize and understand that lots of the citizens in Rotterdam, I'm also a citizen of Rotterdam, are not doing active mobility at all. They walk, they don't cycle, they then have the car, and they basically do not use the public transport systems that are there. So for cities, it's also a big challenge. I heard that yesterday as well. Big challenge to get people to behave differently, and I know it from real life experience how difficult it is. And then the digitalization will help you. But I'm so I consider myself digitally savvy. So using apps, etc. In order to, I'm curious, so I'm using them. But lots of people don't. So it's difficult. So if you're in one street and you have to take a decision going from A to B, then it's for most of us, it's really difficult to understand or know that in the next street there is a great opportunity to get a shared bike, for instance.
Right.
And so then we wave to the taxi and we take a combustion engine vehicle. So that on a really practical level, that's I think what we're facing now.
This is where in London City Mapper was a breakthrough moment, wasn't it, on creating open data? And I saw the alliance created by the likes of Voy and Lime and Tier. Is that having an impact?
I'm really pleased that you mentioned that, because Transport for London set a great example, I think, in opening up the data and inviting these big commercial entities to enter, like Google, etc., etc. What we see is different. We see a lot of different approaches in Europe. And I'm sorry that I have to address Europe as it's not one entity. It's lots of countries and then lots of cities and then lots of people with different opinions. So one of the reasons I think you left, but getting back to your question. Your question was? No, it's open data.
I dare not open this dialogue. It will go wrong.
No, it's open data. So the data. Opening data is, I think, the critical element in any change. So cities should be really liberal in this and opening up all their data. Cities are great gatherers and producers of data, transforming that into information that we can actually use in our streets as individuals, using this, being part of those cities. That's the key element.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Okay. Right, so at the top we said there's a consumer driver, and we talked about that. Now let's just go around again and talk about the decarbonisation driver. that bringing multimodal systems works on. And I know Department of Transport are doing some fantastic, serious work on this. What would you like to tell us about?
Yeah, so decarbonisation is probably the primary driver of many of the, certainly the active research and innovation programmes within the Department for Transport. And when we think about decarbonisation, there's a number of different lenses we could use, and I'm interested in Emma's view on this as well. So the first is that we're seeing transformation of the types of fuels that are being used in our transport system, and that's affecting the way in which we're choosing our journeys. If we follow on from the point about almost confidence in a journey, if you're a driver of an electric vehicle going on a long journey, one of the things that really gives you confidence about that long journey is availability of charge points during that journey. And many of the systems now have really good data that not only shows you the location of the charge points, but shows you the real-time availability of charge points. So thinking about that sort of end-to-end notion in the context of decarbonisation to encourage people to change their choices about journeys is important. But the second thing is thinking about how we can deliver those marginal gains within the transport system to reduce the carbon consumption of the system. And there are some really good examples, and something that you reminded me of, Paul, was some work that's being done looking at the Port of Dover, where we have terrible congestion very, very regularly, simply because of the demand and the really important role of our transport system in delivering freight in the UK. In the past, there was a quite influential report that accused the Department of Transport of being freight blind. And that actually really sort of stimulated a very explicit focus on thinking about the responsibility of the department to support the freight industry that's absolutely critical to our economy and well-being in the UK. And some really interesting work that has used artificial intelligence in order to enable much more proactive and supportive information being fed to those who are overseeing the operations at the Port of Dover, and then allowing them to dynamically manage the traffic flow in a way that then is improving the efficiency of the transport system and thus removing not only the carbon but also improving the air quality. When I joined the department in mid-2021, it was all about decarbonisation and net zero. Actually, over the last 18 months, there's been much more of a move towards thinking about decarbonisation, resilience and adaptation and air quality, because we know that actually the work of transport needs to consider not just the removal of carbon and the contribution of carbon, but also the impact on air quality. And of course, Heathrow is one of the areas that's often used as an example in terms of that sort of very notion.
That story you're telling us about Dover, I remember, is down the M20, you can communicate with heavy goods vehicles about scheduling their speed up, slow down. Because when you get to Dover, there's going to be room for you to be processed or not. So actually, rather than just creating giant kludgy you're actually slowing down the traffic with the intelligence coming. It's great, isn't it? And
it's the notion of empowerment as well. So some of these technologies, if you're not careful, can become a bit sort of preachy and dictatorial, and actually giving people information and allowing people to then be informed about the choices or the decisions they're making, but also helping them see how they're contributing to the overall system is something that I think is a really good notion that we can see within our transport system as well.
I feel I ought to say that was a small company called Entropy, and back over there you'll see companies like Entropy and many others doing their pitching what they can do in the course of the day. Now here's a big moment, Emma. Jet Zero Council. What a thing that is. It's a large idea, a world-leading idea. You're being chief executive of it. How is it?
It's good. So I suppose we've been on a real journey with it, because the first sort of few months, I think we had to spend quite a lot of time just getting everybody focused on what it was we were trying to achieve. So just to take people back, this was pre, net zero 2050 commitments. We had the Paris Agreement in place, but nothing was sort of codified into legislation or anything like that when we first kicked off. And I think we were worried. I think government was concerned, aviation industry was concerned, we're heading on this inexorable move, but at the same time society had a bit of a downer on aviation, and that was starting to grow. We were starting to see in other economies action being taken to curb flying or to shift people's modes of transport, which was fine when you're in Europe and you've got an amazing train system that connects up countries, but we're an island nation. How are we going to get anywhere at any speed? You know, we rely massively on aviation for cargo. 1.5 million tons of cargo goes through Heathrow, and we hardly have any freighter flights there at all. It all goes in the belly hold of passenger planes. So people were seeing the environmental impact rightly. I live under the flight path, right? So I understand things like noise and air quality. But what they were missing was what a huge economic driver this is for this country in particular. And so the great thing coming together with the Jet Zero Council was, right, we need to get the most vocal people, the most capable people. So this is the leaders in their sectors, in academia, joining together between the business and transport secretaries, now also Department for Net Zero Secretary also co-chairs. So this is also integrating government decision-making as well, which is a big step forward. And we set ourselves some quite simple targets, two routes, sustainable aviation fuel, and then zero emission flight. Very stated, because zero emission flight there's a way to go on that. We need brand new airframes. Churning airframes takes decades. So, I mean, even if we had the solution for, you know, a 200-seater battery-powered flight today, you wouldn't be able to churn that fleet until the mid-2040s. And that's not a long haul flight. So we had to bring sustainable aviation fuel rapidly up the agenda. The great thing is the technology's there for first generation fuels. We're working very, very hard on synthetic fuel production at the moment. Again, chemistry is really well understood. But in terms of getting the production plants up and running, and fundamentally, our issue on sustainable aviation fuel isn't a technology issue, it's a supply and demand issue, because at the moment, to the extent it exists, it's higher priced, it's about 3 times the price of normal Jet A. And so government's been very progressive in introducing a mandate, so 10% by 2030 sustainable aviation fuel obligation. That has signalled to the market very strongly that we need to start producing. And the next bit is, how do we bridge between the price of kerosene and the price of now and to be synthetic fuels in particular, so that we can encourage the market to produce and then to take up. So I think actually it's been a pretty successful route to really clarifying our objectives, getting everybody on the same page. When I started, there was a lot of argument, you know, oh, we need this, we need this, we need this. And the first 6 months was really saying, guys, we're never going to get government or ourselves to do anything unless we all agree what the pathway is. So but it came out of, it was born out of a deep concern that there was a risk we were going to lose the sector if we didn't really push forward. And it's you know, the aviation sector has ended up, perhaps by necessity in many geographies, having to take the lead on these decarbonisation routes, because if we don't, we won't be around in 20 years.
And we've had our first full sustainable aviation. Tell us about that.
Yeah, really exciting. So when we first kicked off, the then Transport Secretary Grant Shapps with the Prime Minister set a slightly, I think I actually called it off the record, audacious goal of flight across the Atlantic without harm to the environment within a generation. And I was like, thanks very much, guys. That's not, as the new
Depends how old you are as to whether that's good or bad, doesn't it?
Well, yeah, I was thinking, how on earth are we going to make this happen? Anyway, the fact that it happened last year in November 2023, we ran a competition, summer 22, where we said, right, everybody, we'll invest in this, we'll give you some money, we'll give you some capability, and Virgin won the competition. And, you know, innovators through and through, really, Virgin, when it comes to commercial flying. And the flight, went to the States and back. I was on it. It was a real moment. I was genuinely a bit emotional about it, because I thought, you know, I'm the mother of 4 kids, and I want them to experience, you know, all of the joy of flying that comes from the social and the cultural and the business benefits. And I thought to myself, no, we really are going to make this happen. And so, yeah, and the great thing was seeing, you know, the CA as a regulator coming together to produce the safety case, the academics coming together to help with how we were going to mix the fuel. And so, yeah, a real joint effort and a real milestone. And more than anything, demonstrating to consumers, this is not a pipe dream. This is not something that we're talking about in chemistry labs. This can happen today. 100% sustainable aviation fuel on a commercial airliner can happen now. We've now got to produce enough of the stuff so that we can get there quickly. And Heathrow has a pricing incentive that basically says if you bring sustainable aviation fuel, you get a material discount on your airport charges. So we're trying to do our bit to push that along.
How worldwide is that? Because I obviously need it to be available at the end of the flight. So how are we at the lead of doing this, or are we at
not quite?
We're not quite, but
no, the Americans we were, and then the Americans came in with their Inflation Reduction Act, you might have heard about that, and put in a taxation regime or a lack of taxation regime to sort of incentivize. I mean, look, for America, petrol production is a central part of its economy. And so I think when they kind of realized a bit later than the UK did, but when they did, they pivoted really quickly. And so what we're now seeing is petrochemical plants flipping into sustainable aviation fuel production in part. Rotterdam, Shell are investing quite heavily in Rotterdam, but we have got plants starting to be in the early stages of, so government committed to 5 plants spade in the ground by 2025. So, you know, we are making progress, but they probably leapfrogged us, and now we need to leapfrog them again.
So come on, Sarah.
And, well, we can't underestimate the complexity and some of the challenges that we have as well within the UK. So we can be very jealous of the US because they've not only got availability of states that can provide solar power, so you've got the renewable energy, they've also got availability of feedstock. And some analysis that we've done in collaboration with Department for Energy Security and Net Zero has really brought into sharp focus the challenges we've got around feedstock availability. So as well as the sustainable aviation fuel that is produced from different sources of feedstock, and waste is one of the sort of clearest routes for aviation fuel, we've got to be looking at what are called power to liquid solutions. They need hydrogen. And so alongside the focus on sustainable aviation fuel, we've got to be thinking about what we need to be doing to support a hydrogen economy. There are potential dangers that we can end up with some really perverse situations where we end up importing energy in order to meet our requirements for sustainability in aviation. So this whole systems modelling that is being looked at really carefully across government is extremely important to make sure that we've got those right international partnerships in place.
Fantastic. Willem, as someone who is not living on this island, what's your observation of how we're doing?
Well, we see a lot. We see it's difficult. So I have an energy background, so I know a little bit about it. I'm also for 30 years now involved in the hydrogen discussion, and it's technically quite complicated, actually. So we need to change from fossil fuels to other energies. We see electrification a lot. That's great, but we also see at the same time that our power grids are our power grids evidently cannot handle this. It's difficult. We see a lot of economies that depend on oil. So, for instance, you mentioned Rotterdam, but the largest petrol harbor in the world is Amsterdam, actually. So, what do? Lots of people depend on that for their income, etc. So we see the changes, we see the discussions, but it's still fossil fuel driven. And it will be for decades. I'm afraid maybe bad news for some of you, but this is the fact. And then we will see a shift in energy, but slowly, because we've invested so much money as a community, as communities, into these let's say the systems that we have in place now. So yeah, I'm really happy with electrification, and also with hydrogen and maybe other types of ammoniac. I don't know, but as a fuel. But yeah, we'll go really slow. Yeah.
I'm going to turn to our online audience. There's a lot happening here, so I've just started to look at. It's a little bit overwhelming. Let me give you 3 questions that we'll go for. All of this is transformation. It involves new skills. What do you think we need to prioritize in terms of new skills? Question 1. I'll let any of you choose. Give you 3 whilst you're thinking up your answer. Multimodal travel seems relatively easy in cities. What about rural environments? And I'll give you 1, which is an easy one. What's your favourite mode of transport? So skills, rural, what do you like doing best?
Skills. We can talk about AI, digitization, and you were talking about the sort of familiarity with technology. Talk about maintenance. We're seeing a lot of sort of questions arising, I think, about how we support maintainers of our very sort of diverse elements of our transport systems. And I think there's 2 things here. We will start to see modularity of technologies that means that actually it's harder to do what we talk about in human factors as forming a mental model of how a system works. Yet very often use the example of the pilot in the aircraft. The reason that pilots can respond to emergency situations is they understand how aircraft work. They understand the fundamentals of aerodynamics that are absolutely essential if you find yourself having to land a plane on the Hudson River, for example. So we need to get this balance between enabling people to use technology, but remembering rules of physics are still going to apply. And we need to, one of the things that Cranfield University were telling me is that they were seeing a massive uptake in their artificial intelligence and data science courses, but they simultaneously saw a downturn in their mechanical and civil engineering courses. That really worries me because we still need those fundamental mechanical and civil engineering skills. Rural, there's some real opportunities for innovation. I'm particularly keen on some of the work that's happening in the Highlands and Islands. Really good example of drones for freight delivery, for example. So I think seeing the opportunities that may be different in rural economies is really important. Favourite mode of transport is really, really difficult. I'm going to say walking, because walking is the point where I get joy. I walk to the station. I occasionally, if I time my journey right, the right time of year, I get to see the sunrise. And that just sets me off in the right spirit for the rest of the day.
Sarah Sharples, role model to us all. Either of you?
Well, for me?
Yeah, go for it.
Skills. I think so. I was in energy and data, so I'm maybe a bit biased, but I think we all need to be educated in the technology, and especially data technology. So we really need to understand more about how we can utilize data, and so that I think is critical. Then rural areas, it's behavioral change. So I used to live in a rural area, and then I had 5 cars, and yeah.
I did know when you said I got rid of my cars.
Yeah.
How many cars did you have?
Yeah, well, when I made that decision 2 actually, and but let's say a decade ago, I had 5 cars and living in a rural area, and we had bicycles in the shed, and bicycles to cycle with the kids, just for leisure, and not for traveling actually. Because then there was always a car around. And so I think in rural areas, lots of people behave like this, and I think behavioral change is, I think, key here. Because we know that in cities, in rural areas alike, the trips that we daily make are really, really short. And you can actually cycle 7 miles or 10 kilometers within half an hour. So why do you take the car? Depending on the weather, evidently, or when you're traveling with your kids. So there's lots of practical reasons why we need cars, actually. But there's also a good reason why you should leave your car standing at the driveway. And I think this is a mind shift. Well, it's easy for me to say because I'm actually actively doing that mind shift myself, and I know how difficult it is. So that's and then the third question was
favorite mode of transport.
Yeah, for me it's the bicycle. Although I really like walking, because then you're really connected to your surroundings, etc. And it's basically our most natural thing to do. I like cycling because I'm also a bit of a speed addict. And so with my cars I was driving really fast, not very favorable, so it's not really good to say this, but with my bicycle I can actually go as fast as I can.
Do you have an electric bike?
Yeah, I have. I'm Dutch, so I have 5 bicycles as well. Yeah, we're a weird country, but no, I actually. So in order to experience all this, I bought what we call a speed pedelec, so a bicycle that goes 50 kilometers per hour.
Wow, that's fast.
And that's really fast. I used to be a motorcycle, so I used to drive a motorcycle, so I know a bit about the dangers of going fast on 2 wheels. But car drivers do not accept me on their road, their road, because they see me as a cyclist and not as a. So I basically at that point I am a moped, a small scooter, but they don't see. They just see a cyclist in front of their car, and they just piss off. And so it's quite dangerous. But I really like electric bicycles because you can go faster, further, with less.
I live in Bristol. It's hilly. I have an electric bike. Get up the hills. It's great. Emma, let's bring you to
Yes, so briefly, because I know we're out of time. So skills, I would say chemists and particularly cryogenics, when we're talking about hydrogen earlier, we don't have much of that in the UK. So we can obviously create a pipeline from our young people, but we need it quicker, probably than that. Rural travel, I've seen some absolutely brilliant stuff on on-demand busing, so small buses that use algorithms to create routes. You can kind of sign up, I want to go from here to here. They do corner-to-corner stops. We've started to trial a little bit of this in the Heathrow area, out in sort of Iver and Slough and Burnham, places like that. Busing isn't economic in rural areas, but if you can find where those routes are and people's patterns of travel, you can make this economic with small busing. So I think that is, the Humble bus has a long way to go yet in serving our populations. And then finally, my favourite mode of travel, well, of course, you'd expect me to say flying, and I absolutely do love flying. The romance of flying is still there. We still have, 80 million passengers coming through Heathrow this year. The demand is not throttling at all. If anything, it's higher than during COVID. But my personal favourite mode of travel, the Elizabeth line. I can get from Terminal 5 to Bond Street in 30 minutes. And it absolutely has changed consumers' use of public transport. Our mode share is now up at something like 45% for public transport at Heathrow, and it always struggled to be in the sort of high 30s. So yeah, it's made a huge difference, and it's been that nudge that consumers needed.
The Elizabeth line. Panelists, thank you so much. Let's put our hands together.